The rotor blades screamed overhead. Below, 300 rifles pointed skyward. Inside the Huey, 4 men. No backup, no reinforcements. The radio crackled one last time. "You're on your own." Fuel gauge dropping. Ammunition running low. Enemy closing in. They couldn't land. They couldn't run. They couldn't surrender. What happened next became the most impossible stand in Vietnam War history. The jungle canopy stretched endlessly below, a sea of green that concealed everything. November 1967, the Mekong Delta, where helicopters became flying coffins and survival was measured in seconds. One Huey gunship hung in the Vietnamese sky that morning. Call sign, Dustoff 23. Inside, Chief Warrant Officer Michael Novosel Sr. gripped the controls. 57 years old, World War II veteran, Air Force pilot who retired once, got bored, then joined the Army to fly helicopters in Vietnam. His co-pilot beside him, his crew chief and medic behind him. They were alone, 30 miles from the nearest American base. Radio range stretched to its limit, and below them, a nightmare unfolded. A 12-man Special Forces reconnaissance team pinned down by 3 full companies of North Vietnamese regulars, more than 300 enemy soldiers. The team had walked into an ambush during a routine patrol near the Cambodian border. Now, they were trapped in a clearing barely 50 meters wide, surrounded by jungle that erupted with muzzle flashes. The call came through garbled with static and gunfire. Casualties mounting, ammunition nearly gone. They needed immediate extraction, or they would die where they stood. Every other helicopter in the region was either grounded for maintenance or committed to operations elsewhere. Command sent the only bird available, Dustoff 23, a single, unarmed medical evacuation helicopter with a pilot old enough to be everyone's grandfather. Novosel didn't hesitate. He pushed the Huey toward the coordinates. His crew chief called out the first tracers rising from the jungle, green, phosphorescent streaks that looked beautiful until you remembered each one could tear through metal and flesh. The North Vietnamese forces had the landing zone completely encircled. Automatic weapons, rocket-propelled grenades, heavy machine gun positions dug into the tree line. Standard procedure said abort. Wait for gunship escorts, wait for air support, wait for artillery to soften the target. But the men on the ground didn't have time to wait. Novosel descended toward the maelstrom. The first burst of enemy fire punched through the helicopter's thin aluminum skin. The crew chief returned fire with his M60 machine gun, brass casings cascading across the deck. The medic grabbed his rifle and joined in. Novosel threw the Huey into a violent sideslip using every evasion technique learned across 2 wars. They couldn't land. The clearing was too hot, too exposed. Enemy soldiers were advancing through the elephant grass toward the American position. So Novosel hovered, 3 feet off the ground. Rotor wash flattening the grass, turbine screaming, while enemy rounds sparked off the skids and punched through the fuselage. The first wounded soldier was dragged aboard, then another. The crew chief and medic hauling bodies into the cabin while simultaneously returning fire. Blood slicked the deck. The helicopter shuddered with each impact. A round shattered one of the instrument panels. Another tore through the seat cushion inches from the co-pilot's spine. Novosel held the hover, steady, unflinching. He needed to extract all 12 men. But the Huey could only carry 6 at a time with fuel and equipment weight factored in. That meant multiple trips, multiple descents into the same killing ground where the enemy now knew exactly where he would appear. He lifted off with 6 wounded aboard, flew them to a secure landing zone 8 miles away, refueled from jerry cans the ground team had positioned there, then turned back toward the nightmare. The second approach was worse. The North Vietnamese had repositioned their heavy weapons. They knew he was coming back, knew his approach vector. They concentrated their fire into a single corridor of destruction. Tracers formed a solid wall of light. RPG trails streaked past the canopy. The distinctive crack of AK-47 rounds hitting metal became a constant percussion. Novosel's co-pilot counted 14 separate impacts on that approach alone. But Novosel descended again, hovered again, while his crew pulled the remaining 6 men aboard. One soldier had a sucking chest wound, another missing half his leg below the knee. The medic worked frantically, trying to keep them alive long enough to reach a surgical unit. Enemy soldiers were now within grenade-throwing distance. The crew chief's machine gun barrel glowed red-hot. Empty ammunition belts piled knee-deep in the cabin. Novosel pulled pitch and climbed away. The Huey gained altitude sluggishly, overloaded beyond specifications. An RPG detonated 20 feet behind them, the shockwave shoving them sideways. Hydraulic fluid began streaming from a severed line. The low fuel warning light illuminated. They made it back to the secure zone, offloaded the wounded, every man aboard bleeding or injured except Novosel himself. Mission complete. Except the radio crackled again. 2 more casualties from a different unit, 3 miles from the original position. Same situation. Surrounded, no other assets available. Novosel's crew chief looked at the shredded helicopter, counted the holes, counted the warning lights on the instrument panel, calculated the odds, then met Novosel's eyes and nodded once. They went back in again. Third insertion, fourth, fifth. Throughout that entire November morning, Novosel brought that dying helicopter back into contested airspace again and again. He extracted 29 wounded soldiers total, flew 10 separate rescue missions, spent 7 continuous hours under direct enemy fire. The helicopter should have fallen from the sky. Physics said it was impossible. The fuel system compromised, the hydraulics failing, the engine gauges redlining. Over 200 bullet holes riddled the airframe. But Novosel kept it flying through sheer skill and determination that bordered on supernatural. He manipulated collective and cyclic with microscopic precision, compensating for damaged control systems by feel alone. When hydraulic pressure dropped too low for normal flight, he used raw muscle to force the controls where they needed to go. His co-pilot later described watching Novosel fly that ruined machine as witnessing something beyond normal human capability. Every control input executed perfectly despite catastrophic damage. Every approach calculated to the centimeter. Every hover held rock steady while enemy rounds chewed through the fuselage around them. The North Vietnamese forces threw everything they had at that lone helicopter. They understood they were witnessing something extraordinary. One aircraft defying an entire battalion. They concentrated their fire, repositioned their weapons, adjusted their tactics, but they could not bring Novosel down. By noon, the enemy began withdrawing, not because American reinforcements arrived, not because of airstrikes or artillery. They withdrew because they ran out of ammunition trying to destroy one helicopter that refused to die. When Novosel finally set the Huey down at the base, mechanics surrounded the aircraft in stunned silence. The helicopter looked like a metal sieve. They counted 204 separate impacts. The tail rotor barely attached, the main rotor blades cracked and splintered, fuel tanks held together by prayers and gravity. The transmission casing cracked clean through. The helicopter never flew again. It had given everything to stay airborne through those 7 hours. Metallurgical analysis later showed structural components failed beyond any safety margin.
held together only by adjacent parts taking loads they were never designed to bear. But every man Novacell extracted survived. 29 soldiers who would have died in that jungle went home, had families, lived lives, because one 57-year-old pilot decided impossible wasn't relevant when lives hung in the balance. Novacell received the Medal of Honor for his actions that day. The citation detailed his valor, his skill, his unwavering courage under fire. But the medal itself seemed inadequate to capture what actually happened in that Vietnamese sky. It wasn't about heroism in the traditional sense. It was about competence elevated to an almost mystical level, about a pilot so proficient that he redefined what a helicopter could endure, about a crew so synchronized they functioned as a single organism.
Novacell flew 235 combat missions during his Vietnam tour. He rescued over 5,000 wounded soldiers during his service. He became the oldest helicopter pilot to fly combat missions in American military history. He earned 4 Silver Stars, 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, the Bronze Star with Valor Device, and countless other decorations. But he never discussed November 1967 casually. When pressed by journalists or military historians, he deflected credit to his crew, to the helicopter itself, to luck and timing. He never claimed to have done anything special. The men he pulled from that clearing knew differently. They wrote letters, visited him years later, brought their children and grandchildren to meet the pilot who saved their fathers. Michael Novacell flew his last combat mission at age 62. He retired again. This time, it stuck. He lived until 2006, dying peacefully at age 85. His son, also a decorated helicopter pilot, spoke at his funeral, described his father not as a warrior, but as a craftsman who perfected his art so completely that it transcended its original purpose. The Huey he flew that day sits in a museum now, preserved exactly as it landed after that final mission. Every bullet hole documented, every damaged component labeled. Visitors walk around it slowly, trying to comprehend how this shredded machine stayed airborne. The answer isn't in the metal or the engineering. It's in the man who flew it, in the moment-to-moment decisions executed perfectly under impossible circumstances, in the refusal to accept that saving lives might be beyond reach. History records countless battles in Vietnam, endless engagements across jungles and villages, but few moments distilled the entire nature of that war into a single image quite like one battered helicopter hovering in a clearing while 300 rifles aimed skyward. One aircraft, one crew, one decision made again and again to descend into hell because men needed saving. The war took many things from many people, but it also revealed what humans can accomplish when skill meets courage meets necessity. When someone decides that impossible is simply a word, not a limit. November 1967, the Mekong Delta, where one Huey proved that sometimes the line between living and dying is held by nothing more than a pilot's hands on the controls and the absolute refusal to let go. If this story moved you, if it made you think about courage differently, hit that like button. Subscribe for more untold stories from history's most intense moments. Because these men deserve to be remembered. Their actions deserve to echo forward. And their example deserves to inspire everyone who believes that doing the right thing matters more than doing the safe thing.